A very good evening, students. How are you all? Hope everyone is doing great and everyone is preparing for the examinations very well. In this session, we are going to discuss about all the GST amendments applicable for November 2021 exams. Yeah, of course, which are going to be conducted in the month of December. Okay, mom. So generally, the amendments which are made up to 30th April 2021 applicable for November exams, November 2021 exams. Now in this session, we are going to be cover all the statutory updates made in GST either through notifications or through circulars. We are going to be covered. So you can see here for November 2021 examinations, right? So all the significant notifications and circulars issued up to 30th April 2021 applicable, right sir? And what are that notifications and circulars relevant for our examinations already given by the ICAI in the form of a material with the heading statutory updates for November 2021 exams, which we are going to discuss now. Okay sir. And if you look at these amendments, majorly the amendments are from the 4 chapters: input tax credit, registration, tax invoice, debit notes, credit notes, and e-way bill returns. From these 4 chapters, we have the amendments. Okay, sir. Now let us discuss one by one. First, from the chapter input tax credit. Right, sir. And if you remember, we have it as chapter number 6 in our Shrestha material. So let us go by the same serial numbers. Chapter number 6, input tax credit. Now the first amendment is from rule number 36.4. The first amendment is from the rule number 36.4. See what rule number 36.4 explains about. It explains about restrictions on availment of input tax credit with respect to the invoices or debit notes not uploaded by the suppliers in their GSTR1. You remember, sir, we've already discussed in our material. You can check out here, sir. Restrictions on availment of input tax credit with respect to the invoices or debit notes not uploaded by the supplier in their GSTR1. Sub-rule 4 of rule 36 discussed about the same. Right, sir. Now, for this rule, now we have two very important amendments. Now, what are that amendments? Let me explain you with the help of a simple example. Okay, sir. Now, let's take an example. Input tax credit. As per my books, let us assume that 1 lakh. 1 lakh. And input tax credit, as per the invoices uploaded by the suppliers in their GSTR1, let us assume that it came around 80,000 rupees. So totally I have made some inward supplies based on which I made some entries into my books of account, and my books of account showing that I am entitled for 1 lakh rupee of input tax credit. But we have studied the conditions for taking the input tax credit. Right, sir. Now the general condition is that you have to claim the input tax credit which is, available in your GSTR 2A, which is reflecting in your GSTR 2A. And when GSTR 2A will be generated? As in when your supplier uploading the details of invoices in his GSTR 1. Now, out of the total 10 suppliers, assuming that only 8 suppliers uploaded their invoices in GSTR 1, and the input tax as per that invoices uploaded by your supplier comes around 80,000 rupees. Now, am I eligible to claim entire 1 lakh as my input tax credit? No. No, sir. Now you are entitled for how much? See, how much input tax credit can I claim in this scenario? Answer is all the input tax credit with respect to the invoices uploaded by the supplier. 100% input tax credit you can claim. That means 80,000 rupees. 80,000 rupees plus 10% of the input tax credit, which is attributable to the invoices uploaded. So that means 10% of 80,000 rupees. So that means now you are entitled to 88,000 rupees input tax credit. And for your kind information, this is as per the old provision. This is as per the old provision. So earlier, how much input tax credit you are entitled to, ma? 100% of the input tax credit you can claim with respect to the invoices uploaded, plus with respect to the invoices not uploaded, the maximum input tax credit you can avail is 10% of the attributable input tax credit of the invoices uploaded. So 88,000 rupees is the maximum input tax credit you can avail in this scenario. Now the amended provision saying that amendments. As I said, no, we have two important changes in this particular rule. First change is that changes in the wordings. Here you can observe invoices uploaded. Invoices uploaded. Now this word uploaded replaced with the word furnished. Furnished. Now you have to read like invoices furnished by the suppliers. Now, does it make difference, sir? Answer is absolutely yes. Furnished means not only uploading the details of invoices in GSTR 1, the GSTR 1 should be furnished by the supplier. So uploaded means simply entering the details of invoices into GSTR 1. That's it. Irrespective of the fact whether your supplier filed a GSTR 1 or not, if he uploaded the details of the invoices into the GSTR 1, you are entitled to input tax credit. But now what the department said, it's not enough that the details are uploaded into the GSTR 1. The supplier should furnish his GSTR 1 with the department. Basing on the fact that, yes, my supplier entered the details into GSTR 1 and I'm not worried whether he's filed the GSTR 1 or not, so I can claim input tax credit. No. He has to furnish the GSTR 1. Following everyone, sir? So that's make the difference here. The first amendment, the wordings, invoices uploaded, now change it with the words invoices furnished. Right, sir? Next, second one, change in the rate. Earlier, you can claim 10% of the eligible input tax credit attributable to the invoices uploaded by the supplier. Now, this being reduced to 5% only. 5% only. So that means as per the amendment provision, so now I cannot claim 88,000 rupees as input tax credit. Instead, I can claim 80,000 is the input tax credit attributable to the invoices uploaded plus 5% of input tax credit attributable to the invoices uploaded, 80,000. So now I can claim only 84,000 rupees as my input tax credit. So this is the first amendment in the input tax credit chapter. A very important amendment. Clear, sir? Now you can check out here. So you can cross out this entire context because this is old provision. The first two paragraph explains about the old provision. You can simply listen, observe this word. Now with effective from 1st Jan 2021, right? That notification number 94/2020 has amended the said rule. The said subs rule to reduce the said percentage. Earlier it is how much, sir? Earlier it is 10%. 10%. Now the said sub rule reduces the percentage from 10% to 5%. Okay, sir. And second change, they have used the word furnished instead of uploaded. Furnished. Right. ITC to be available by a registered person in respect of the invoices or debit notes, the details of which have not been furnished by the suppliers. Earlier, the words being used is the details of which have not been uploaded. Now, the word uploaded is replaced with the word furnished. Right. In the form number GSTR1 or using the IFF, invoice furnishing facility. So, what is this invoice furnishing facility? I'll explain in the next amendment, right? So we have amendment of QRMP, quarterly return monthly payment scheme, under the returns chapter. There I will explain what is IFF, invoice furnishing facility. Okay, sir. So now the two changes are, number one, the words for submitted, uploaded, exchanged with the word furnished. So that means here now the supplier has to upload the details of invoices into the GSTR1, and as well as the GSTR1 should be furnished with the department. Then only the recipient can claim the input tax credit. Right, sir. So with respect to the invoices uploaded and furnished, 100%. With respect to the invoices, right, which are not furnished, so he can maximum claim 5% of the eligible input tax credit. Clear, everyone, sir? Right. Next one. Second amendment is with respect to rule number 86B. It's actually a new rule, rule 86B. You can check out here. A new rule 86B has been inserted in the CGST rules, and these particular provisions came with effect from the 1st January 2021. Okay, sir. Now, what this rule explains about restrictions on use of amount available in the electronic credit ledger. Now, this new rule imposing some restrictions on use of the input tax electronic credit ledger balance. Now, for what purposes this rule has been introduced? What is the background of this rule? Now, with the introduction of this rule, who are going to be affected? Let us learn all these points. Second amendment, rule number 86B. Now, let us try to understand this concept with the help of an example. First of all, it is a new rule. It's not an existing rule, ma. Let us assume that my electronic credit ledger showing a balance of rupees 1 lakh. Rupees 1 lakh. My output tax liability let us assume that Same 1 lakh rupee. Now for the payment of this output tax liability, now can I use my entire electronic credit ledger balance? Can I use my entire input tax credit available? Answer is no. Whatever the output tax liability you have through electronic credit ledger, balance, you can pay only up to 99%. So that means at least 1% of your output tax liability, at least 1% of output tax liability should be paid through electronic cash ledger. Electronic cash ledger. That means by using your input tax credit balance, 1 lakh into 99%. So only 99,000 of your output tax liability you can discharge by using your input tax credit balance. And the remaining 1,000 rupees, that is 1 lakh into 1%, this remaining 1,000 rupees you have to pay through your electronic cash ledger. Though you have sufficient balance in your electronic credit ledger, still you are not entitled to use the entire amount. Only 99% of your output tax liability can be discharged through the electronic credit ledger, and this is the provision as per the rule number 86B. So why this rule has been brought? What is the main logic behind this background? See, actually the main purpose of introducing this rule is to, put a check on false claimants, those people who are claiming the fake input tax credits, right? To, track who are claiming the fake input tax credits. The main purpose is that, see, whenever you're paying 1% through electronic cash ledger, no. See, first of all, you need to deposit certain amount into your electronic cash ledger. So you are going to deposit certain amount into your e-cash ledger by using NEFT. Then that person will be easily tracked, right? So whenever you are making deposits into electronic cash ledger by RTGS, IMBS, NEFT, so when you opted for the online mode, definitely the tracking is possible. So the department can easily cross-check whether he is a genuine input tax credit claimer or whether he is a fake input tax credit claimer. Right, sir. The main purpose of introduction of this rule is that to track, to put a check on false input tax credit claimers. Clear. But here you will get it out. Sir, if that be the case, there are also certain genuine taxpayers, genuine input tax credit claimers. What about them, sir? Even though they are genuine in payment of taxes, their input tax credit is genuine. Even for them also, payment of 1% through electronic cash ledger, it's a bit of harsh provision on them. Yes, that is why, you know what, this rule 86B is not applicable to all. This rule 86B is applicable to only those who satisfied conditions. Right, now you'll get it out here. So to whom it is applicable? Applicability of rule number 86B. As I said, no, this is not applicable for all the suppliers. This is applicable only for those suppliers whose taxable turnover is greater than 50 lakhs rupees in a month. So whoever making the taxable turnover, taxable supplies, and the value of such taxable supplies exceeding 50 lakhs rupees in a particular month, for that particular month, this rule 86B is applicable. So that means, let us take an example that, sir, for April 2021, my taxable supplies, let us assume that some 55 lakhs rupees. Now, whether in this scenario rule 86B applicable, answer is yes, applicable. As your taxable supplies exceeding 50 lakhs rupees for April 2021, rule 86B applicable. That means out of your total output tax liability, 99% you can discharge by using the balance in electronic credit ledger, and 1% minimum you have to pay through electronic cash ledger. Fine, sir. Very good. Now, in the May month, suppose that my taxable supplies are 49 lakhs only. Now, in this scenario, whether rule 86B applicable for May 2021 May 2021 tax period? Answer is absolutely no, because your taxable supply is not exceeded 50 lakhs. No. So the very important point you have to observe, the applicability of rule 86B is on a month wise. Every month you have to check out whether your taxable supplies exceeded 50 lakhs or not. In those months, your taxable supplies exceeded 50 lakhs. In that months, 86B is applicable. For those months, your taxable supplies less than 50 lakhs or exactly 50 lakhs. For that particular month, 86B not applicable. Right. See, don't be under impression that for a particular month, when your taxable supplies exceeded 50 lakhs, okay, then fine. For the rest of the financial year, 86B applicable. No. You have to verify the applicability of 86B on a month wise. Clear, everyone? Right. This is the first important point you have to remember. Second important point. Sir, while calculating this taxable supplies, the ceiling limit, no, 50 lakhs rupees. We have to exclude certain things. We have to exclude certain things. So what are to be excluded? Number one, exempted supplies. So while calculating the ceiling limit of rupees 50 lakhs, you have to just ignore exempted supplies turnover and as well as zero rated supplies. So these two have to be excluded while calculating this taxable supplies ceiling limit. Clear, sir? This is the second important point you have to remember. And next one, non-applicability of these provisions. So it is applicable to whom, sir? Only those whose taxable turnover exceeding 50 lakhs rupees in a particular month. For them, 86B rule provisions applicable. But sir, you said rule 86B has been introduced to put a check on fake input tax claimers. Correct. And sir, there are certain genuine taxpayers also there. For them, in the genuine taxpayers cases, suppose that if I'm a genuine taxpayer and my taxable turnover generally exceeding 50 lakhs every month. So that means for me also rule 86B provisions applicable. Yes. Now I cannot use the entire input tax credit balance for discharging my output tax liability, though it is a genuine. 1% minimum I should pay through electronic cash ledger. For me, it's a harsh provision. Yes. But don't worry, if you are covered in these non-applicable provisions, right? So there are certain conditions that if you satisfy any of that conditions, any of that criteria, Though your taxable turnover exceeding 50 lakhs rupees in a particular month, for you, this 86B provision is not applicable. Now, what are the criteria? Right? So, number one, if you have paid income tax liability of rupees 1 lakh, suppose that in the last 2 financial years, your income tax liability, the income tax paid by you is greater than 1 lakh rupee in each year. Then for you, this 86B provision is not applicable. 86B provision is not applicable. Right, sir? So this provision is applicable for person, like any person who is a proprietor, then Karta, managing director, and 2 partners, and then whole-time director, and then members of managing committee, and board of trustees. Suppose that you are a sole proprietor. Doing business and making taxable supplies. And your turnover in every month, your turnover exceeding 50 lakhs rupees. Now for you, 86B provision is applicable. But if you satisfy this criteria, like during the previous year, 1920, 2021. Now at present, these two are the last two financial years. No, 1920, 2021. In these 2 years, if your income tax liability, if you paid income tax of more than 1 lakh, in 1920 you have paid more than 1 lakh, 2021 you have paid more than 1 lakh. Now for you, this rule number 86B provision is not applicable. See, majority of the genuine taxpayers will be covered here. They will be out of 86B rule provisions because of this criteria, sir. Because you know, sir, 50 lakhs per month turnover means yearly 6 crores. So when your turnover is 6 crores, more than 6 crores, see, even if you like opted for presumptive taxation system under section 44 AD, at least 8% you have to declare as your income. 6 crores into 8%, 48 lakhs. So when your income is 48 lakhs, it is quite obvious that your tax liability exceeding 1 lakh. See, when your taxable income is 48 lakhs, it is quite possible that your tax liability is more than 1 lakh. Even after you claim 80C deductions, chapter 6A deductions, right? So that means if your turnover exceeding 50 lakhs in a particular month, you are a genuine taxpayer. Your turnover exceeding 50 lakhs every month means yearly your turnover is more than 6 crores. That scenario, it's quite obvious that you will be having income tax liability more than 1 lakh. Anyhow, you have paid income tax liability of more than 1 lakh for the last 2 financial years. Then you satisfied this criteria. Now for you, 86B provisions not applicable. Happy. Okay, sir. Now in that scenario, you can use your entire input tax credit balance for the discharging of your output tax liabilities. So majority of the genuine taxpayers will get the benefit out of this criteria. They will be out of the rule number 86B provisions. Clear, sir? Next one. Second criteria. Registered person receiving received GST refund of greater than 1 lakh rupee in the preceding financial year. Suppose that you have claimed a GST refund of more than 1 lakh during the preceding financial year. Now for you, 86B provision is not applicable. We have seen, no, there are some situations like if you are exclusively engaged in the exports, right, sir? See, with respect to the exports, you will be having input tax credit balances lying in your electronic credit ledger being unutilized, because exports, on exports you don't be having any output tax liability. They'll be covered under the zero rated supplies category. No, zero rated supplies, they're taxable at 0%. Your output supplies are taxable at 0%. That means your output tax liability is zero. But for the purpose of making that exports, you might have already been used some inward supplies on which you might have already paid certain input tax. That entire input tax lying as credit balance in your electronic credit ledger. And that balance you can be utilized only when you have output tax liability. But here you don't have any output tax liability as your supplies are covered under zero rated supplies. So generally what you will do then, you can claim for refund, whatever the input tax credit balance showing, that entire amount you can claim as a refund. Are you following now? So if the GST refund you have claimed exceeding 1 lakh in the preceding financial year, then for the current financial year, 86B provisions not applicable. That's the second criteria. And third criteria, a registered person who paid the output tax liability through electronic cash ledger. So the minimum you have to pay, like, greater than 1% of the total output tax liability. See, in the preceding months or in the preceding quarters, you have paid certain amount of output tax liability through e-cash ledger. And that amount, if it is exceeds greater than 1% of the total output tax liability for the current month or for the current quarter, 86B provisions not applicable. That means, let me explain you through an example. Suppose that April, May, June, my output tax liability, let us assume that 1,000 rupees in the month of April, and I have discharged this by using my input tax credit balance paid through input tax credit. Let us assume that 800 rupees I paid through input tax credit balance, and the remaining 200 rupees I have paid through balance lying in electronic cash ledger. Through eCash I paid 200 rupees. Now for the month of May, my output tax liability, let us assume 1,000 rupees, and the credit balance available 700, and 700 I paid through electronic credit ledger. The remaining 300 I paid through eCash. Right, sir. Now for the month of June, my output tax liability is 1,000, and I have an input tax credit of entire 1,000 rupees. Now, can I use the entire 1000 for the payment of my output tax liability in the month of June? Okay, look at here. First of all, what is the total output tax liability? The total output tax liability comes to be, 3,000 rupees. 3,000 rupees. 3,000 into 1%. So that means 30 rupees, no? So at least 30 rupees you have to pay through e-cash ledger, e-cash in your previous months, in your preceding months, at least 1% of the total output tax liability. You can check out here. I have paid here 200 rupees. I have paid here 300 rupees. Totally, I have paid 500 rupees through electronic cash ledger in my previous months. Right, sir? So here you can see I have satisfied this condition of at least 1% of the total output tax liability should be paid through electronic ledger. I have satisfied that conditions. Now, in that case, for the month of June, this 86B provisions not applicable to me. I can pay my 100% of output tax liability by using my input tax credit. So 99% through input tax credit, 1% through electronic cash ledger, that condition not applicable, as I have satisfied this criteria. Are you following, sir, everyone? Right, sir. Next. And third criteria, third exception, if you're a government department, right? If you're a government department, or if you're a local authority, or if you are a public sector undertaking, or if you are a statutory body, for which 86B provisions not applicable. So for government departments, local authorities, public sector undertakings, statutory bodies, for these people, Rule 86B provisions not applicable. Okay, sir. So there are totally 4 criteria. There are 4 scenarios in which 86B provisions not applicable. Okay, sir. Now, let us see in theory. So restrictions on use of amount available in electronic credit ledger. 86B, it's a new rule, as I already said. So here, the amount available in electronic credit ledger, right? So it can be used to discharge your output tax liability, but subject to a maximum of 99%, right? Where the value of taxable supplies other than exempted and zero rated supplies. That is why we have discussed now that ceiling limit of 50 lakhs excludes exempted supplies and zero rated supplies. Clear, sir? So in a month exceeds rupees 50 lakhs, right? So here you can observe this point explains about applicability. This rule is applicable only with respect to those registered persons whose monthly turnover exceeding 50 lakhs. Now, while calculating the turnover, there are 2 exclusions other than. So whenever you are coming across the word other than, that means it explains about some exception. So while calculating this 50 lakh ceiling limit, you have to ignore exempted supplies and as well as zero rated supplies. Okay. Right, sir. Next. So it implies that registered person shall not use the amount available in the electronic credit ledger towards his output tax liability in excess of 99%. So that means you can use up to 99%. Okay, sir. Next. And you can check out this example here. So here they made an interstate supply of 100 lakhs where they are taxable at 18% GST. That means your output tax liability comes around 18 lakhs rupees. And you have an electronic credit ledger balance. That means your input tax credit balance 20 lakhs. So you have more than your output tax liability. Right, before this amendment, out of this 20 lakhs, right? You can utilize 18 lakhs for the payment of this liability. So entire your 100% output tax liability can be met with your electronic credit ledger balance. But now we have a new rule. No. Now, as per the provisions of rule number 86B, the maximum electronic credit ledger balance you can use only 99%. So 80 lakhs is your output tax liability, out of which 99% should be, you can use your electronic credit ledger balance. That is 17,82,000 rupees you can pay it through ITC. Remaining 1% you have to pay through your electronic credit ledger only. So that means out of the total output tax liability of 18 lakhs, a minimum of 18,000 rupees should be paid through electronic cash ledger, 1%. Okay, sir. Next, exceptions. To whom it is not applicable. To whom it is not applicable. The restrictions shall not apply in the following cases: if you happen to be a person, proprietor, karta, managing director, two partners, whole-time director, members of managing committee, board of trustees, those who have paid more than 1 lakh as income tax in each of the last 2 financial years. We have discussed, no, right? If you paid an income tax more than 1 lakh in the last 2 financial years, now for the current financial year, for you 86B not applicable. Second one, those registered person who received a refund of more than 1 lakh in the preceding financial year on account of unutilized input tax credit. In the case of zero rated supplies, which are made without payment of tax, and as well as through inverted duty structure. This inverted duty structure is a concept which you are going to learn in your final level. Right, sir. Here at CNT level, it is enough to know that if a person received a refund of more than 1 lakhs during the preceding financial year on account of the unutilized input tax credit balance, for him 86B provision is not applicable. Next, where a registered person has discharged his liability towards output tax through electronic cash ledger for an amount which is in excess of 1% of the total output tax liability applied cumulatively up to the said month of the current financial year. So that means in your previous month's quarter, if you paid the certain output tax liability through electronic cash ledger, which is happened to be more than 1% of your total output tax liability, then in that scenario also 86B provision is not applicable for you for that particular tax period. Okay, and the last exception, where a registered person happened to be a government department, PSU, LA, statutory body, for you 86B provision is not applicable. Clear, sir? So this is rule number 86B, and these are the 2 very important amendments from the chapter input tax credit. These 2 are very, very important, especially this rule number 86B, as it is a new rule. And even that rule 36(4), the first amendment we have discussed, also very important, because there is a change in the rate. No, earlier 10%, now being reduced to 5%. You might get at least an MCQ with respect to that amendment. Okay, sir. Right? Very good. Just go through it, sir, once. Just go through it and ask the doubts if any. Complete it, sir. Now let's moving on to the amendments in the chapter registration. Right, sir. And the first amendment is with respect to persons or classes of persons who are exempt from Aadhaar authentication. Right. Now, here the first amendment is with respect to those persons who are exempted from this Aadhaar authentication. Here, whatever the context given here, no. The first, you can strike it out this entire context, because you can observe here the above notification has now been superseded, and consequently the following persons have been exempted. A new list of persons is given who are exempted from Aadhaar authentication. Right, sir? So up to this, This is a old provision. So that's why I asked you to strike it off in your material. Right, sir. Now let us see what is a new provision. Now this is a new list. This is a new list of the persons who are exempted from Aadhaar authentication during their registration process. Right, sir. Now who are they? A person who is not a citizen of India and state government or central government departments, local authorities, statutory body, public sector undertakings, and the persons who are applying for UIN, unique identification number. Right, sir. We have seen no United Nations, IMF like organizations, international organizations, those who apply for the UIN, they are exempted from Aadhaar authentication while they are applying for the registration, sir. Okay, now. So this is a new list which you have to remember. These are the now people who are exempted from Aadhaar authentication. Right, sir. This is a first amendment in the chapter registration. You just ignore the old list. This is the old list. You just ignore this, and try to remember this new list. Who are, sir? Person not a citizen of India. Number 2, state government, central government departments. Number 3, local authorities. Number 4, statutory bodies. Number 5, all the public sector undertakings. And number 6, the person who are applying for UIN. Now, these 6 persons have been exempted from Aadhaar authentication when they are applying for the registration. Okay, sir. Now, second amendment. Revised time limits under rule number 9. Right, sir. What is rule number 9 explains about? So generally we have discussed, rule number 9 explains about the time limit for the approval of the grant of registration. Right, sir. Now let me explain this particular provision with the help of chart for the easy understanding. Chapter number 7. Registration. Now, rule number 9. We have amendments in the rule number 9. Now, see, whenever you're applying for the registration, right? Aadhaar authentication is a very important criteria. Suppose that for you, this Aadhaar authentication applicable for the registration process. So case one, sir, you have completed the Aadhaar authentication procedure. So you opted for Aadhaar authentication, and completed within the time limit. Completed the Aadhaar authentication. Now in this scenario, what is the provision, sir? Within a period of 7 days, the proper officer should process your application for registration. And then he has to allot you the certificate of registration. Yes, sir, within 7 days. Earlier it used to be 3 days. You can check out now the first amendment here. The time limit for approving the grant of registration to the applicant by the proper officer if the application and accompanying documents are found to be in order has been increased from 3 working days to 7 working days. Right. This is a first change happened. Earlier, no. Earlier here, You have a time limit. The proper officer should complete the process within a period of 3 days. Now this is being increased to 7 days. Increase it to 7 days. So when you opted for Aadhaar authentication and completed and submitted all the documents necessary for registration, all of them are found to be correct in order, and there is no requirement of physical verification of the premises by the proper officer, then within 7 days, that proper officer should process your application for registration and should allot the certificate of registration. Sir, what if the case if the proper officer not allotted me that certificate of registration within a period of 7 days? Then deemed registration provisions anyhow applicable as it is. You can take a deeming fiction that you have been allotted the certificate of registration by the proper officer. That is kept as it is, no change in it. Right, sir? This is a first amendment. Now, second scenario. Sir, in case if the proper officer deems fit that there is a need of physical verification of premises. Suppose if proper officer deems fit for the physical verification of premises. Now earlier, the time limit is 60 days. Now the time limit reduced to 30 days. 30 days. Now, if the physical verification of the premises is required within a period of 30 days, right? So the proper officer should process application for registration. And he has to allot the certificate of registration to the supplier. Right? This is a second amendment happened in this particular rule. Earlier, there is a time limit of 60 days. Now this has been reduced to 30 days. 30 days. Right? Now when this 30 days condition applicable, whenever there is a physical verification of the premises. Right? So check out here, sir. Further, the time limit of grant of registration after physical verification of the premises. Right, sir? So in that scenario, the time limit has been reduced to 30 days from 60 days. So earlier it used to be 60 days. Now it's been reduced to 30 days. Okay, sir. So generally when this physical verification of the premises comes into picture, that's actually case 2. Here you can write the case 2. There are 2 scenarios. Scenario 1, for you, the Aadhaar authentication is mandatory, but you have not opted for it. Who not opted for Aadhaar authentication, or you opted for Aadhaar authentication, but fails to do so. Opted for Aadhaar authentication, but fails to do so. Fails to do so. 2 scenarios covered here. Number 1, for you, Aadhaar authentication is mandatory, but you have not opted. Number 2, you opted for Aadhaar authentication, but you are failed in compliance with the Aadhaar authentication provisions. Now, in these 2 scenarios, the physical verification of the premises comes into picture. Now, in that case, the time limit, earlier it used to be 60 days, but now that's been reduced to 30 days. Within a period of 30 days after the successful completion of the physical premises of the supplier, the proper officer has to issue the certificate of registration. Now, in case if he has not issued the certificate of registration within 30 days, that deemed registration provisions comes into picture. You can take a deeming fiction that you have been allotted the certificate of registration by the proper officer. See, the deemed registration provisions kept as it is. Raising a query, objection, and the proper officer needs any information, right? Any clarification, he can issue a show cause notice. That 7 days time limit is there. And after you receive the show cause notice, right, you also get 7 days time limit for replying to it. And after the proper officer receiving the reply to the show cause notice, the proper officer again have 7 days time limit for going through that clarification, your reply, and allotting you the certificate of registration. That all the provisions kept as it is, remains same. What has changed? Only these. Okay, now, right? So you can check out here, sir. So proper officer, and whenever he is going for physical verification of the premises, no, he has to approve the prior permission from the AC or DC, Assistant Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner. Right, sir. Then he can be go through the physical verification of the premises, and after that he has to issue the registration certificate within a period of 30 days after the physical verification of the place of business. Clear, sir? Next. Time limit for the issuance of the notice, which we have already decreased. No, now it's been increased to 7 working days. Right. See, this entire context is explained in a very brief manner or very easy to understand manner in this table. You need not go through this entire theory. Instead, you can just go through this table very easily. You can understand. So look at that first point, first scenario. Registration is to be granted after physical verification of the premises. Right, sir. Now, what is the time limit? As we discussed now, 30 days from the date of submission of the application. Right. When the after physical verification of the premises possible, when this physical verification of the premises comes into picture, when number 1, who fails to undergo Aadhaar authentication, that means does not opt for Aadhaar authentication, or where the proper officer deems fit for physical verification of the premises. These are the 2 scenarios where physical verification of the premises comes into picture, and the time limit 30 days. Clear, sir? Next. Other than those above. So that means he opted for Aadhaar authentication. Yes, and successfully completed Aadhaar authentication. The time limit is 7 working days. Earlier it used to be 3 working days. Now it's been increased to 7 working days. Okay, sir. And if he wants to seek any clarification or any further documents, as we discussed now, 7 working days. Right, sir. So remember, only these 3 points, only these 3 are the amendments here. The entire theory given above this table is depicted in this table in a very brief manner and easy to understand manner. Clear, sir? Right. Next. This is a first, second amendment with respect to the registration chapter. Now, third amendment. Violation of conditions of taking the input tax credit, mismatch of GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B, or violation of Rule 86B to make the GST registration of a person liable to cancellation. Now, this is actually an amendment to rule number 21. We have studied now, sir, rule number 21, the circumstances under which the GST registration of the supplier liable for cancellation. Right, sir? We have seen like situations like discontinuance of the business, right? Like, closure of the business, and where the supplier doing the business without issuing the proper invoices, the supplier, entering into the anti-profiteering measures, who has not filed the returns for the consecutive period of 6 months. Like that, we have seen certain scenarios where the GST registration is subject to the cancellation by the proper officers. We have seen that in the rule number 21. Now for that rule number 21, some more contraventions have been added. Earlier we used to have list of 6 to 7 items. No, now there are 3 more contraventions, 3 more circumstances were added to rule number 21. What are they, ma? Number 1, violation of conditions of taking the input tax credit. Sir, for the purpose of claiming of the input tax credit, no, you have to satisfy certain conditions. You must be having a documentary evidence. So invoice should be there. In that particular invoice, the tax element should be mentioned separately. Like this, we have studied some conditions, no? Right. So if you are violated any of such conditions, but still you have claimed input tax credit, now your registration certificate subject to cancellation. Number 2, mismatch of GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B. Sir, in GSTR 1, you have shown a turnover of 1 lakh. But in GSTR 3B, you are disclosing a turnover of 80,000 and paying the tax only on 80,000. So there is a mismatch of turnover of GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B. So even this scenario, this circumstance also leads to cancellation of your registration certificate. And number 3, violation of Rule 86B. What is Rule 86B? Just now we have learned, latest amendment in the chapter input tax credit. Here it is. Restrictions on use of amount available in electronic credit ledger. Right, sir? So here, 3 more contraventions have been added to the rule number 21. The circumstances under which your certificate of registration is subject to cancellation. Number 1, violation of conditions of taking input tax credit. Number 2, mismatch of data in GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B. Number 3, violation of Rule 86B provisions. So if you covered by any of these 3 circumstances, then you will be hit by rule number 21. Your certificate of registration is subject to cancellation by the proper officer. Clear, sir? That's the provision, sir. Next. That's the amendment happened to the rule number 21. So the proper officer may cancel the certificate of registration of a registered person, right? If he is contravened any provisions of the rule number, any provisions of the rule number 21, right? All that contraventions is prescribed under the rule number 21 of the CGST rules. Now, this rule has been amended to provide few more contraventions. Some new contraventions added to this rule. What are they, ma? Violation of condition of taking input tax credit, mismatch of GSTR 1 and 3B, and then violation of Rule 86B provisions. Clear, sir? The same provisions explained in the diagram. That's the 3rd amendment in this chapter. Now, 4th amendment. Provisions relating to the suspension of GST registration. So we have some amendments to rule number 21A, which discussed about the suspension of GST registration. Right, sir. Here, some additional powers is being given to the proper officers, right? If they have a valid reason that valid reason to believe that the registration of a person is liable for the cancellation, before cancelling their certificate of registration, no, they can out and out suspend your registration first. Before the cancellation, they will suspend your registration immediately. And for the suspension of registrations, they are under no obligation to offer you an opportunity of being heard. First, they will suspend your certificate of registration. Then they will provide you the reasons under these grounds. Your certificate of registration is being suspended. It is under suspension. Now come to the office. Provide me the clarifications, necessary documents with respect to my queries. Then if I satisfied, I lift upon that your suspension, your registration will become active. If I'm not satisfied with your clarifications or documents, then your certificate of registration will be cancelled. So that means now the proper officer has the power to suspend the certificate of registration of the supplier immediate effect without being provided an opportunity of being heard to the supplier. Out and out, your registration certificate will be suspended first. Then they will explain you under these grounds your certificate suspended. Then you will get an opportunity of being heard. Right, sir? So you can see here where the proper officer has the reasons to believe that registration of a person liable to be cancelled, he can now suspend. He can now suspend. Important point. The registration of such person pending the cancellation proceedings without affording the said person a reasonable opportunity of being heard. Right, sir? So for the suspension, without giving an opportunity of being heard to the supplier, the proper officer straight away he can suspend certificate of registration. Clear, sir? And where a comparison of returns furnished by the registered person under section 39, you know, the details of outward supplies furnished in GSTR 1 and the details of inward supplies derived based on the details of outward supplies furnished by their suppliers in GSTR 1. See, generally, I assume that I'm a proper officer. And I found some mismatch of outward supplies. You're saying that your outward supplies are 1 lakh, and you're claiming only 80,000 rupees as your outward supplies in your GSTR 3B. There is a mismatch of data, and there is a mismatch of data of inward supplies. When I compared your inward supplies with the outward supplies of your suppliers, see, for your supplier, it is a GSTR 1 outward supply. For you, it is an inward supply. Right, sir? So I found these mismatches when I compared, right, GSTR 1 of the supplier with GSTR 2 of the recipient. This cross verification will be happen? No, right, sir? In that scenario, I can out and out suspend your registration first. Right. So you can see, or such other analysis as may be carried out on the recommendations of the council shows that there are significant differences or anomalies indicating the contraventions of the provisions of CGST Act, which leads to the cancellation of your registration. Before going for the cancellation, first proper officer suspend your registration. His registration shall be suspended. After suspension, an email will be sent to you. A communication will be sent to you through email. Dear supplier, under these grounds, we have found some significant differences while comparing the returns. Under these grounds, your certificate of registration will be suspended, has been suspended. So the said person shall be intimated in the prescribed form by sending a email. Right, sir? Now this intimation for suspension and notice for cancellation of registration, right, because of the differences and anomalies are highlighted. First, then by issuing that notification notice, will ask explanation, and within a period of 30 days, that supplier has to give the explanation, sir. Are you following, sir? Right? So first, the proper officer suspends certificate of registration. Then regarding that suspension, an intimation be given to the supplier through email. And after the supplier received the email, he has to reply. He has to come to, provide the explanations within a period of 30 days. With that explanation, if the proper officer satisfied, that suspension will be lifted. Your registration will become active. If the proper officer not satisfied, the suspension leads to cancellation. So your certificate of registration will get cancelled. Next. So what is the impact of the suspension? The impact of the suspension of registration is that as long as your certificate of registration is under suspension, you are not being granted to any refund of the GST. As long as your certificate of registration is under suspension, you're not being granted of any of the GST as a refund. You can check out here. In case the cancellation is initiated by the department on its own and the registration of a person being suspended, then such person shall not be granted any refund of CGST during the period of suspension. During the period of suspension. This is a new sub rule. This is a new sub rule. Suppose that from April to June, your registration is under suspension. Now for these 3 months, if you made any application for the refund of GST, that will not be entertained. That will not be entertained. You shall not be granted with any refund of GST. Clear? Next portion. And suspension of registration shall be deemed to be revoked upon the completion of the cancellation proceedings by the proper officer. Right, sir? So that means, once the cancellation proceedings being completed, no, that suspension will be revoked, your certificate of registration will get cancelled. But in case if the proper officer satisfied with the clarifications provided by the supplier, that suspension orders will be revoked, cancelled. That means your registration will become active status. Clear, sir? So the suspension of registration may be revoked by the proper officer anytime during the pendency of the proceedings for cancellation if he deems fit. Right, sir? So this is the another amendment and the last amendment from the chapter registration. Clear, sir? So there are 4 important amendments from the chapter registration. So just go through it, sir, once and ask the doubts if any. Completed, sir. Now let's move on to the chapter number 8. The amendments in the chapter number 8: tax invoice, credit notes, debit notes, e-waybill. Now let us see the first amendment in this chapter. It explains about the e-invoicing. It is mandatory for all the registered persons. E-invoicing is mandatory for all the registered businesses with the aggregate turnover in any of the preceding financial years starting from 17-18 exceeding rupees 50 crores. Right. Now let me explain this point with the help of the chart, a chart. Tax invoice, debit notes, credit note, e-waybill. Right. So concept of e-invoicing. So whether e-invoicing is mandatory for all? No, we have a turnover limit. E-invoicing is mandatory for only those suppliers whose turnover exceeds rupees 50 crores in any of the financial years starting from 2017-18. Starting from 2017-18. Suppose that during the financial year 2018-19, if your turnover exceeded 50 crores, now for the financial year 21-22, e-invoicing is mandatory. So 17-18, 18-19, 19-20, 20-21. If any of these 4 financial years, in any one financial year, if your turnover exceeded 50 crores, then for the current financial year 21-22, e-invoicing is mandatory. What is e-invoicing, sir? And under what circumstances we need to generate the e-invoice? With respect to which invoices this concept of e-invoicing is applicable? Sir, e-invoicing is required with respect to the B2B transactions, and e-invoicing is required with respect to exports. So if you satisfied that turnover condition, no, in any of the financial year, starting from 17-18, if your turnover exceeding 50 crores, right? So with respect to B2B transactions and export transactions, you have to generate the e-invoice. Clear, sir? Now, what is this e-invoicing? See, we have e-invoicing portals, no, like e-invoice1.gst. gst.gov.in, e-invoice2.gst.gov.in, e-invoice3.gst.gov.in. Like that, we have 10 e-invoice portals, no, right? Now you have to log into that particular e-invoicing portal with your credentials. Then in that particular portal, you have to upload your invoice details. After uploading that invoice details, one QR code will be generated. Right, sir? Sorry, IRN, not QR code, IRN. Invoice reference number will be generated. That invoice reference number you have to be printed on the QR code. Static QR code, not a dynamic QR code, static QR code. Right, sir? So that is what actually e-invoicing is. Okay, sir. See, this e-invoicing is not a new concept. It's already introduced by the Finance Act 2020 itself, but it has undergone so many changes over the time. Earlier, the ceiling limit was happened to be 500 crores. Now that's been actually reduced to 100 crores. Now this 100 crores further reduced to 50 crores. Further reduced to 50 crores. You can check out here. So earlier, the ceiling limit is 500 crores. Now that's been reduced to 100 crores. Now further reduced to 50 crores. Now this 500 crores, 100 crores ceiling limit you can ignore. Just try to remember what is latest amendment, 50 crores. And this provisions came into effect from the 1st April 2021. 1st April 2021. Here anyhow, it's been given in a tabular format. As I said earlier, 500 crores. This is with FD from 1st October 2020. Just ignore about it. Then 100 crores with FD from 1st Jan 2021. It is been further amended. Now you just try to remember only this provision. Now the ceiling limit for the e-invoicing is 50 crores and effective from 1st April 2021. Clear, sir? This is a first amendment. First amendment. Second amendment is a validity period of the e-way bill or the consolidated e-way bill. Sir, earlier the validity period of the e-way bill with respect to the other than over dimensional cargo. There is no amendment with respect to over dimensional cargo time limits. Only other than over dimensional cargo, we have amendment. And this amendment came into effect from 1st Jan 2021. Earlier, the time limit used to be for every 100 kilometers, 1 day is a time limit. Now this 100 kilometers increased to 200 kilometers. 200 kilometers. Right, sir. So that means, suppose that your traveling distance is 500 kilometers. As per the old provisions, the validity period of the e-way bill is 5 days. 500 kilometers, no. For every 100 kilometer, 1 day is a validity period. 500 kilometers, 5 days. But now, as per the latest provision, if your traveling distance happen to be 500 kilometers, now the validity period of the e-way bill is just 3 days. It's just 3 days. 200 kilometers for 1 day now. So 200, 400 kilometers, 2 days. For the remaining 100 kilometers, you will get additional one day, because part thereof also will get you one additional day. So that means now whatever the e-way bill you have generated for the 500 kilometers distance, the validity period of that e-way bill is just 3 days only. That means in that 3 days time period, you have to reach your destination. Otherwise, whatever the e-way bill you have generated, that will be lapsed. That will be lapsed. Again, you need to renew that e-way bill, or you need to apply for the new e-way bill. Clear, sir? So the same example provided here, a registered person who has to transport the goods for a distance of 500 kilometers, right? Earlier, it would have been valid for 5 days, but now any e-way bill generated on or after 1st Jan 2021, it will be valid only for 3 days. So now, as per the new provision, the validity period is 3 days only. So this is a second amendment. And this amendment is exclusively applicable only for other than over dimensional cargo. Clear, everyone, sir? Right? Next. The third amendment from this chapter is blocking of e-way bill generation facility extended to a person whose registration has been suspended. Just now we have discussed the situations, right, where the registration of the person subject to the suspension. Right now, we have discussed now the proper officer got the authority to suspend your registration certificate straight away. And during that suspension period, no, sir, now you're not entitled to generate the e-way bill. You don't have that right to generate the e-way bill while your registration is under suspension. You can see here a new clause has been added to rule number 138E to block the e-way bill generation facility of a person whose registration has been suspended under rule number 21A. Right? Here we have two amendments. This is the first amendment, and now the second amendment is this. First amendment is that whoever the persons whose certificate of registration is under suspension is not eligible to generate the e-way bill. Is not eligible to generate the e-way bill. And the second one is that this is an existing provision only, but there is a changing in the wordings. Those supplier, taxpayer, whoever not furnished his returns for a consecutive period of 2 months, he is not entitled to generate the e-way bill. Now the wordings 2 months replaced with 2 tax periods. 2 tax periods. So what does it affect, impact? What is its impact? Because you know, sir, now we have a scheme called QRMP, quarterly return monthly payment. That means now the taxpayer have an option to file the returns on quarterly basis. Suppose that if I opted for QRMP scheme, I will file the returns on quarterly basis. That means for every 3 months, I'll file the return. Now, basing upon the fact that I have not been filed the return for the first 2 months of the quarter and blocking me from the e-way bill generation, it's not correct. Because there is a QRMP scheme which is being provided by the council and I have opted. So council itself given the option to me to file the return on quarterly basis once in 3 months. Right, sir? So that is why this months, the wording of the month changed with the tax periods. See, if you opted for monthly return scheme, normal scheme, monthly returns, if you have not filed the return for the first 2 months, yes, you are blocked from e-way bill generation. But if you opted for quarterly return scheme, right, simply saying that you have not filed the return for April and May, so you are blocked from generation of e-way bill for the month of June. It's not correct, right? Because when I opted for quarterly return, April and May, anyhow, I don't file any return. I'm going to file the return only in the month of June as it is a quarterly return. So that's why the word month has been replaced with the tax period. Now, tax period could be a month, could be a quarter. Clear, sir? That's the second amendment in this particular provision. Next. Clarification, the next amendment, sir, in this chapter, clarification in respect of applicability of dynamic QR code. Dynamic QR code. See, there is a difference between static QR code and dynamic QR code. And if you remember, we have discussed this particular concept in our regular classes. In the dynamic QR code, whenever you scan the dynamic QR code, no, directly it will be redirected you to the payment page directly. The amount how much you need to pay, that will be displayed. The supplier's name will be displayed. Supplier's bank account details will be displayed. You can simply enter your UPI pin and pay out. That's it. But when it comes to static QR code, after scanning that static QR code, right, you need to enter the amount voluntarily. How much amount you are going to pay, that will not be displayed. You have to enter on your own. You have to enter on your own. That's the basic difference between static QR code and dynamic QR code. So when you scan a dynamic QR code, directly you will be redirected to payment gateway. The amount, how much you have to pay, it will be displayed. Supplier's name will be displayed. Supplier's bank account details will be displayed. Simply you just enter UPI pin, pay the amount. That's it. Okay, sir. Now, sir, to whom this dynamic QR code system applicable? A clarification has been provided, sir. This dynamic QR code system is applicable with respect to only those registered persons whose turnover exceeds 500 crores in any of the preceding financial year starting from 17-18. So 17-18, 18-19, 19-20, 20-21. If in any of these financial years, if your aggregate turnover exceeded 500 crores, then for you, the dynamic QR code system applicable. Your invoice must have a dynamic QR code on it, right, sir? Now, whether this dynamic QR code applicable for all the invoices? No, only with respect to B2C invoices. Because we have already learned with respect to B2B, e-invoice applicable, e-invoicing. With respect to B2C, dynamic QR code provisions applicable. But of course, subject to the satisfaction of conditions. For e-invoicing, we have seen the turnover limit of 50 crores. And for dynamic QR code, 500 crores. E-invoicing is applicable when your turnover exceeded 50 crores in any of the financial years starting from 17-18. And dynamic QR code system applicable only when your turnover exceeded 500 crores in any of the financial years starting from 17-18. Clear, sir? So when your turnover exceeded 500 crores, yes, that scenario for all the B2C invoices, you must have dynamic QR code system in your invoice. See, the main reason behind this concept of, dynamic QR code system is to track the payments, to encourage the cashless transactions, right? To track who is paying this amount. See, B2C transactions mean business to customer. See, B2B transactions, we can easily track supplier, who is recipient. But when it comes to B2C transactions, it's highly difficulty to track the recipients. Because majority of the B2C transactions happen through cash. So there won't be any tracking system actually. It's not possible to track the customers, all the customers, recipients under B2C transactions. That's why this concept of dynamic QR code have been introduced. Whenever you scan a particular dynamic QR code, no, you're paying through how? You're paying through either UPI, net banking, right? RTGS, IMBS, through kind of digital payment. No. See, if it is a digital payment, we can easily track that person who is paying this amount. Are you following or not? There's the main logic behind introducing the concept of dynamic QR code, tracing out, tracking the payments. Clear, sir? And when the payment is being received in the cash, the supplier may not be shown it as his turnover. Right? Cash transactions, we can easily escape from the turnover calculation. No. But if it is a transaction made through online, he cannot skip the transaction from the calculation of his turnover, because tracking is possible. Are you following, sir? Next. So this is a clarification with respect to this provision, sir. This is applicable only with respect to B2C invoices and those registered person whose aggregate turnover exceeded 500 crores. Then they must have a dynamic QR code system. Okay, sir. Next. Next. Sir, whether this dynamic QR code system applicable to all the persons? No. We have some list of exclusions here. We have some list of exclusions. You can see here non-applicability of this dynamic QR code system. Right? So who are they? For insurers, it's not applicable. Banking companies, not applicable. Financial institutions, including NBFC, not applicable. GTA, goods transporting agencies, not applicable. Those who are engaged in the supply of passenger transportation services, not applicable. Persons who are supplying the services of admission to exhibition of cinematographic films and multiplex screens. Multiplex screens, you know, this dynamic QR code system not applicable. And those who are engaged in the supply of OIDIR services, online information and database access or retrieval services. You can see here reference 7. 7 said that the provisions of OIDIR has been discussed at the final level. So what are the OIDIR services? It's none of our business. It's the inter level. It's enough to remember. Okay, for OI supplier of OIDIR services, this dynamic QR code concept not applicable. Even though their turnover exceeding 500 crores in any of the financial year, for them dynamic QR code system not applicable. Enough to remember. So insurance companies, banking companies, financial institutions, NBFCs, GTA, supplier of passenger transportation services, multiplexes, OIDR services. For these people, dynamic QR code provisions not applicable, irrespective of their turnover. Okay, ma? Next. No dynamic QR code in the case of exports. What is the need? Because we already learned with respect to exports, e-invoicing concept is already there. E-invoicing concept is already there. So static QR code anyhow available in the invoice. No need of again another QR code like dynamic QR code. Clear, sir? You can check out here. As regards the supplies made for exports through such supplies, those such supplies are made by a registered person to an unregistered person. However, since e-invoices are required in the case of the exports, as exports are treated as B2B supplies, so dynamic QR code not applicable. E-invoicing provisions applicable, no? Right. So dynamic QR code provisions not applicable. Next. So what are the details required to be captured by the dynamic QR code? I've said no already. Supplier's details, supplier's bank account number, value of supply, tax amount, right? All these, the details to be captured in the dynamic QR code. Right, sir? You can check out here, sir. Supplier's GSTIN number, supplier's UPI ID, payee's bank account and his IFSC, invoice number, date, total value and tax amount. Right, sir? So these details should be there in the dynamic QR code. Next. Compliance with dynamic QR code requirements. So there are so many scenarios will comes into picture while complying with this dynamic QR code system. Suppose that I have bought some goods from a supplier for whom this dynamic QR code system provisions are applicable. Good, very good. And at the time of making up the payment, he said that, okay, scan this particular brochure or a sticker, right? Thereby you can automatically, you will get the amount and how much you have to pay, everything, details. I've scanned it and I said, sir, do I need to pay like through net banking system? Can I pay through UPI IDs? Can I pay through, my debit card, or can I pay through my credit card? Right. Sometimes still the recipient can request to make the payment in cash. Like this, different situations will comes into picture. So after scanning, the recipient may be paid through UPI ID. He may be paid through Google Pay, PhonePe, or Paytm. Or he may be paid through his credit card, debit card. Right. It's also an online mode of payment, right? Sometimes he can pay through certain amount through cash, certain amount through this UPI system. Now, whenever I paid through UPI or any other online mode of payment, now does it said to be that complying with the provisions of QR code, dynamic QR code? Answer is absolutely yes. But a cross reference should be made. Okay. I am being the supplier, given a dynamic QR code for the payment. Recipient scanned it and made the payment through UPI ID. So these are the details. The transaction details should be there in the invoice. Cross-reference, for the cross-reference purposes. In that scenario, yes, dynamic QR code provisions have been complied with. We can set that dynamic QR code provisions complied. Clear, sir? So you can see, if the supplier has issued invoice having dynamic QR code for the payment, the said invoice shall be deemed to have been complied with the dynamic QR code requirements under the given cases. Look at the case one. Look at the case one. If the supplier provides or displays a dynamic QR code, but the customer opts to make the payment without using dynamic QR code, and supplier provided a cross reference of such payment on the invoice, yes, in that scenario, that dynamic QR code provisions have been complied with. We can take the deeming provision. Yes, dynamic QR code provisions satisfied. So look at here, sir. In case where the supplier has digitally displayed dynamic QR code and customer pays the invoice using any mode like UPI, like PhonePe, Google Pay, Paytm, Amazon Pay, or by using his credit card or debit card, or using his online banking facility, or through cash also, or any combination of the payments, right? In that scenario, the supplier should provide a cross reference of the payment. So that means cross reference means the transaction details, how the recipient paid that amount, the transaction ID, date, time, amount of payment, payment mode, everything should be there on the invoice. In that scenario, yes, dynamic QR code provisions said to be satisfied. Okay, sir. Next. Or if we paid through cash without using this dynamic QR code. Sir, I don't want to scan any codes, right? Let it be. What is the amount? 1 lakh. Okay, take this 1 lakh amount cash. In that scenario, yes, the supplier has to return on that invoice, printed on that invoice. The recipient has paid the amount through cash. Right, cross the reference. Cross reference is very, very important. Then the supplier provides a cross reference of the amount paid in cash along with that date of payment on the invoice. Next. Then in that scenario, that invoice shall be deemed to have complied with the provisions of dynamic QR code. Okay, sir. Next. That's the case one where the recipient paid through UPI, net banking, debit card, credit card, or through cash. What the supplier has to do, supplier has to make a cross reference on the invoice. What do you mean by the cross reference? That cross reference means that on that invoice, transaction ID, transaction amount, mode of payment, all these details should be entered, displayed. Clear, sir? Next. Case 2. Look at the case 2. If a supplier makes the payment available to customers, an electronic mode of payment where though dynamic QR code is not displayed, but the details of merchant as well as transaction are displayed or captured otherwise. So that means dynamic QR code not printed on the invoice, but that recipient has made the payment through electronic mode, right? So UPI, net banking, debit card and credit card, right? In that scenario also, if the supplier made any cross reference on the invoice, dynamic QR code provisions have been said to be satisfied. If the cross reference, again you can see the wordings, if the cross reference of the payment made using such electronic modes of payment is made on the invoice, the invoice shall be deemed to comply with the provisions of dynamic QR code. As simple as that. Yes, the recipient has paid through Google Pay. This is the transaction ID, transaction date, time, amount. All these details should be there in the invoice. Should be printed on the invoice. Then dynamic QR code provision said to be satisfied. Next, case 3. In case of the prepaid invoices, suppose that I purchased a mobile phone through Amazon, and I made the payment instantly. I have not opted for COD, cash on delivery. I have made the payment instantly. That means invoice will be generated, no? As in when you make the payment, prepaid invoices. See, that means before you got the invoice, before your supplier giving the invoice to you, before the supplier generating the dynamic QR code, you have made the payment already. Prepaid invoices, right? Where the payment has been made before the issuance of invoice. In that case also, sir, your invoice should contain the cross reference. So whenever your supplier issuing the invoice to you, know that invoice should contain the details of transaction date, transaction time, transaction reference ID, everything. In that scenario also, again, the dynamic QR code provisions have been said to be satisfied. So again, you can see here, if the cross reference of the payment received, right, and it is made available on the invoice, then invoice deemed to be complied with the provisions of dynamic QR code. Clear, sir? Everyone, right? Now, in case other than prepaid supply, so that means you made the payment after the issuance of invoice. Now, in that scenario, that invoice should contain dynamic QR code. Now, on that invoice, the dynamic QR code should be displayed. Should be displayed. Right, sir. Next. And the another situation is that once the e-commerce operator or the online application has been complied with the dynamic QR code requirements, whether the suppliers using such e-commerce portal or application will still be required to comply with the requirement of the dynamic QR code. Answer is not required, sir. See, if you are making the supplies through e-commerce portal, suppose that I have a restaurant and I am selling my food and food items through Swiggy, Zomato, who are the e-commerce operators, and that Swiggy, Zomato already been complying with dynamic QR code requirements. Now, do I again comply with the dynamic QR code requirements? As already my supplier, that is e-commerce operator, is already been complying with the dynamic QR code system. Now, for me, it's enough to give a cross reference of the payment. Cross reference of the payment. See, whatever the turnover I have achieved through Zomato, on that turnover, I have to pay certain commission to Zomato people. It's been around from 25 to 30%. Suppose that for this month, I have achieved a turnover of, let it be some 50 lakhs through Zomato, on which 25% I have to pay to the Zomato. 12,50,000 I have to pay to the Zomato as commission. Right, sir? Now, whenever the payment is making, Now, again, this dynamic QR code system, this provision should I comply with? Not required, sir. It's enough to provide the cross-reference details. So look at here. Dynamic QR code requires applies to each supplier registered person separately if such person is liable to issue the invoices with dynamic QR code for B2C supplies. In case if supplier is making supply through e-commerce portal or application, the said supplier gives cross references of the payment received in respect of the said supply on the invoice, then such invoices would be deemed to have been complied with the requirements of dynamic QR code system. That's it. It's enough to give the cross reference, the transaction details on that invoice, right? So that's it. So these are the amendments from the chapter tax invoice, debit notes, credit notes, and e-way bill. Okay, sir, you just go through it and ask the doubts if any. Completed, sir. So now we have the amendments from the last chapter, returns. In this chapter, we have a few amendments, but which are very important and at the same time very lengthy, especially the first amendment, QRMP, quarterly return monthly payment scheme. This amendment itself will take at least 45 minutes to 1 hour time to explain. Okay, so that I would like to take in the second session of this amendments class. Okay, ma'am. In the first session, we have covered amendments from the chapter input tax credit, registration, and tax invoice, debit note, credit notes, and e-way bill. 3 chapters amendments covered in this session, ma, first session. So second session, I'll be covered amendments from the chapter returns. Okay, sir. Right. So we'll meet you again in the second session. Till then, have a good day. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Okay, ma. Right.